Hey guys, welcome to another session of For the Sake of Science. If you have not seen this section or this kind of segment before, then you probably don't know me too well. But if you have, you're a constant watcher of me on YouTube, then you know that a long time ago I did like these, what we call science classes. It's really just me like breaking down like, you know, anatomy and like animation and stuff like that on stream, and I usually just pull the VODs and make them into videos. The most popular ones are like comparing Charlotte, so Fire Charlotte's forehead, Corinne's summer skin boob nerf, and Diane's S3 making Luna look like she's naked. If you don't know those, it's probably still on, it's on YouTube somewhere. I forgot what I titled them, but anyways, to continue that series, I did get a lot of encouragement based on my like latest video of the breakdown for episode 4 heroes, that including like the ML Lilius, the ML Chiron, and you know, I'm putting them in kind of like with a question mark at the end. We don't know 100% if it's ML Chiron. ML Lilius seems to be like 100% ironclad, but I talked about a lot of the animation stuff. Now in that, I was talking about, oh, I love this Summertime Iseria animation. Now, even though while I'm making this recording, the banner has already, you know, discontinued, the event is over. But if you're watching this video, hopefully you have pulled her, because she's a limited hero. You should have pulled her, even though she's not that great. Although I did successfully use her in World Arena one day. Anyways, long story short, she's not that good, right? But I wanted to do an animation breakdown of it. With the encouraging words I got from the comments of the episode 4 trailer breakdown, a lot of you guys are saying that, you know, there's not a lot of people doing this kind of content. And since I do come from a background of the film industry and the gaming industry, I have some knowledge there, and you guys seems to like you're enjoying it. So I wanted to do this one. But instead of just the Summertime Iseria breakdown, I actually wanted to compare it with the Green Iseria and Briar Witch Iseria. I actually want to show the evolution of it. This is something that I noticed before. I may have not really mentioned about it, but if you come to my live streams, more often than not, I'm talking about little things like that. So I mean, it's not like I'll create a whole like stream session just for talking about animations, but you know, it kind of, we talk about it in passing. But in this video, I'll have a full breakdown. I'm gonna use the hero journal here. I do own Iseria and everything, but except Briar Witch. But I want to use the journal here to be consistent. So what I'm doing here, wait, what the heck? They added a sandbag to the back? Oh, I see. This is so you could preview this. Interesting. I actually never noticed this. I noticed this myself. But okay, so notice, okay, so basically what I'm doing is, obviously I'm recording the video, but I'm gonna take this recording here and also break it down. Alright, so just notice those animations though, the S2 animation and then the S3 here, check this out.
Forever, I pledge myself.
I'll show you guys a comparison of the differences, even in the sprite animation, which doesn't usually happen too much. So it's kind of cool. Right, so that was Iseria regular. Let's go to let's go to Briar Witch first. So Briar Witch is one of the ML5s I do not own. I do hope to get her one day. I think she's still useful. All right, and then she doesn't have an S2, or in terms of an S2 animation. So let's just go for the S3.
This is going to hurt.
Now this is of course a big improvement, as you can see like the background and stuff, but like I said, I'm recording this and we will jump into the breakdown. So last one is the Summertime. I don't know, man, I still call her Seaside Iseria sometimes, but Summertime, I gotta work on it. Summertime Iseria. Alright, let's preview this. Now unfortunately I can't really trigger the passive, but the passive is more or less the same as the series S2, so that doesn't really change. But the S3, now look at this.
It's way too hot, humid, and noisy here.
Hopefully you guys already spotted that, but if you didn't, don't worry, I'm gonna break it down frame by frame.
I swear.
The animations do happen really quick, so sometimes it's really hard to appreciate some of the details. But if you have a trained eye in terms of, you know, just spotting animation stuff, you would have really noticed that Summertime Iseria animation is insanely good. The Briar Witch one was already really good. When Briar Witch came out, I was like, the animation is really good. but the Summertime, it tops it. Anyways, I'm gonna pull that and I'm gonna drop it into my video editor so we can do a frame by frame analysis. Okay guys, thank you for sticking with me. Now we're ready in the video editor to go frame by frame. So as I captured Green Iseria, Briarwitch Iseria, and then Summertime Iseria animations, I want to kind of walk through like the evolution. Now some may not say that it's an evolution, but you have to admit that if you played Epic 7 for a while, you do understand that they actually have evolved in terms of the fidelity of the animation. Now, not too long ago, I also made a critique video on what I thought about Closer Charles. I spent about 15 to 20 minutes critiquing the animation and why it's bad. It is still bad. It's still one of the worst ones. No one likes it, not that I know of at least. But you can see why. Alright, there's a lot of things that was missing from the Closer Charles animation that is already seen in the Green Iseria animation, as old as that. So first things first, let me just play it through. So this is the Green Iseria animation. So you can see it goes to black, the background. That's pretty common if you looked at a lot of the old animations in the past. They had a black background mainly. And then the next one to play is Briarwitch Iseria. Now check this out. So here in the S3 portion, it's still black, but then you get some full color. Arguably that's still in the what we call the sprite area. So usually the S3 animations are break down to two things. One is the sprite based animation. So sprite based animation is like stuff like this. So where you can see the life bar, you can see the souls. When it gets to the hand-drawn animations, and this is the two portions that Smilegate decided to do, so until they change this philosophy, this will be how they do the animations. While their S3 animations has some sort of way to transition out the UI portion, so like the souls, you can see the icon there, Siri with the health bar, the CR timeline, they transition it out by fading it away, and that's the case of all the transitions. They do it pretty smoothly, I have to say. Like I'm doing frame by frame here, and there's about like maybe 7 frames before it disappears, which is really fast. Usually it's a very smooth response. You see this hero shot on Iseria, and of course you can tell even the animation quality, the drawing quality rather, not the animation. The drawing quality is a bit less finessed, but for the time, you know what, it was still really good. I have to say this very early on, why Epic 7 caught my eye, why I ended up ditching my old gacha game to play Epic 7 full time, was because of Iseria's animation. It was in one of their kind of global launch trailers. It was actually Korean actually, but it was like before global launch. I saw this trailer, one of my viewers and members on Discord, he's like, hey, are you gonna ever test out this game called Epic 7? I'm like, you know, at that time I was, you know, really, I didn't like the gacha game I was playing at that time. I wanted to ditch it somehow, but Epic 7 was brought to my attention. I looked at the trailer, and if you guys know me, I'm very picky on like art quality, but the sound and how Epic 7 edited that trailer, Iseria's animation was one of the things that stood out. Those flying swords with the glow, and then this S3 animation, it was so beautiful. I'm like, what the heck? This is a mobile game? And so I tried it out, and of course I eventually fell in love with it. And as you guys know, I've been doing this for like what, 3 years. So as soon as Global came out, I already started doing content for it. But anyways, so it transitions back. So usually, like, because what you have to understand, like, is that in like the game itself, the S3 animation does take a lot of work, hand drawn, frame by frame. Of course, when we say hand drawn, it just means that there's extra effort in it. I mean, it could be CG, which they're introducing a lot more now, like so Operator Cigarette and stuff like that. They're introducing CG elements, which are flattened and compressed into video, right? So it's not real-time rendering of CG, but it's videos. But it transitions back because why? Because they're dynamic objects that you still need to hit. So like in case of that sandbag there, it's still gonna be like, you know, like a Kron or whatever, or a Luna or an SSB or something like that. It's gonna be dynamic. It's gonna be interchangeable. So they gotta do these kind of like cool tricks where the animations can overlap, even with like insane effects, as you can see here. Overlap with UI elements, overlap with dynamic objects, and for the time, this is a really good like animation. It's very impactful. Now this is the kind of stuff that you know, really excites me, and why Epic 7 is still one of the best in terms of, I think, mobile gaming market with all the anime weeb gotcha games right now. Epic 7 still has one of the best fidelity in terms of art and animation. I mean, look at this. This is old, right? This is old. And just look at the metaphors, the storytelling, of course. Like, cause, you know, she says sword of flowers or whatever, and then you get these thorns and you get the leaf petals. But it's, most of the time, people don't notice those things, right? They notice the explosion. They notice that big sword coming down on their enemies. So, I mean, this is really good. Now, this video is a breakdown of Seaside Iseria, so I'm gonna spend more time there. But just notice and how it transitions out. There's particles of those petals, flower petals, leaving. So the whole time, you're very immersed in it, and sometimes you don't even pick up on those details, but you are just very sold on it, you know? And the particles that come out of her here also are very elf, like you see them in like animes and stuff, like forest elves, and like there's like I don't know what they are, like particles, like pollen or whatever floating around, but they're like glowy pollen. So she really sells that metaphor well. Now Briar Witch Iseria also very nice. So let me just skip down here a bit. I have a breakdown of their sprite animations, which I'll draw your attention to. I'm gonna play this a bit so you get the live. So she throws the sword up. So again, sprite animation, you see the health bar, you see the UI, the souls, and the CR boost and the menu items. Now transitions into the S3 animation. As you can see, the UI menu is the top right. So if you wanted to yield your RTA or World Arena, you want a top right game. You can't even do it when the S3 animation actually takes over. It's like it's inactive. They wanted you to experience the animation. I think that was like this episode 1 tagline. Play the animation. I think that's what their old tagline was. Now, Briar Witch Iseria, it still looks really good. Of course, the storytelling of her background. So this like very depressive, depressing animation with the rainfall, and how the sword thrown up actually comes down as rain. I mean, in Green Iseria, we have a sword coming down in terms of like a literal sword. This one comes rain first, and then she flips in terms of her attitude, right? So here's that hero shot I'm talking about. I always mention this called the hero shot, which the Closer Charles lacks, right? But I hope Smilegate, I mean, they're not gonna change Closer Charles animation, but I hope they will never make that mistake again, because that's terrible. It's a terrible animation. Storytelling still sucks. So this goes back into, so even though that the background is black, so understand the reasoning behind it. I mentioned this in other videos, but in case you're watching this for the first time, the metaphor they want to sell is that they don't want to force the S3 to be located in a location that doesn't make sense. You understand what I mean? So they are introducing more backgrounds now. So for example, like LQC, her S3 animation, her like actual hand-drawn animation part, she's in the sky. Now that's pretty ambiguous, so that kind of works. Like that metaphor works, because you could be anywhere, right? But what they're trying to do is obviously like, because if they're launching the S3, let's say in Savara, that's a desert background, then like they don't want to lock themselves down to like a beach background or a desert background. That was their old concept before. They changed that with Summer Iseria and the newer heroes coming out. So like Operator Cigarette, she kind of floats into the sky, but the background before she gets into the sky is actually like a dune. It's kind of like a desert thingy. So they don't care about that as much anymore. I guess their philosophy changed over time. But I guess it's just because they realize they can't continue to sell the S3 animation stories if they keep it to like a generic black background. So Briar Witch Iseria here, going back to the sprite animation, isn't much necessary again, because why? Because it transitions really quickly to the dynamic objects. They're keeping to this very well, so they're silhouetting the actual targets. So if it's a Kairon there, if it's a Rylet there, if it's a green Violet there, they're silhouetting the targets, which is it's still very masterful how they do it, because like they're really planning this out, right? There's like this. You can also see the encoding on the video recording. You can see the background is like very pixelated. They do have to do that. Just imagine loading full-on HD animations into a mobile game for every single S3. That's just too much. So it's a very highly compressed video, but because it plays so fast, and then they have extra elements. So the glows, like those purple lines, those are actually sprite based elements. So you can think about them as like transparent PNGs. They're actually floating on top dynamically. That's why you could get the sharp visual. So they're not actually part of the background animation, which is again encoded video. The purple glow there, that's a sprite animation, which is very low in terms of load on their engine. So that's how they can get the animation smooth. Of course, like I think part of the difficulty Smilegate has to always consider is like, how do we sell our story? How do we make it as cool as possible? But then how do we make it so that the game doesn't lag? I remember back in the day when I used to run an old emulator, specific S3 animations would lag more than others. You might still experience this. I'm not quite sure if they've optimized it now. Since back then, I've upgraded my PC, so I don't see the difference between S3 animation lag. But I remember back then, like ML Ken's animation S3 was like very laggy compared to something like a Luna S3. That still might be visible on maybe lower end machines or even lower end phones. You might see certain lag on S3 animations, and that's why, because not all S3 animation will be able to have the same amount of what we call dynamic particles and versus video elements. So video elements, because it's compressed, it's flattened, there is no extra load on it. Depending on their compression, sometimes the more black you have, the less it actually loads. So the common codec H.264 does not actually count black pixels as information, so therefore H.264 usually has a very low compression rate. So hopefully you guys are learning something out of this so far. So yeah, so a lot of sprite-based animation. Now going back, so look at those rocks coming out. So very different motif compared to Green Iseria. You still get some particles, but she's very depressing. And then no flowers. Yeah, no flower petals. So very, very different. Now here's the next part I wanted to talk about. Before we get into Summertime full breakdown, I'll be drawing lines and, you know, proportions and stuff like that to get your nerd on. But I wanted to compare this evolution of just even the sprite animation. The sprite animation, not so much of an evolution. So I did my best to capture them because they have different timing. They have actually different timing for when the animation actually launches and when it finishes. So it was really hard for me to get the average. They are all cropped the same, although they're overlapping on each other. So some might not have the full frame, but because this is Summertime Iseria breakdown video, really, I wanted to have Summertime Iseria not being overlapped by anything. So she's on the right, of course, as you can see. But this is the first time I'm introducing Summertime Iseria, and then we're gonna go do a full screen animation breakdown. So what's interesting is that if you compare a lot of the games in the market, games that have what we'll call ML heroes. So it's basically the same hero but a different element. Not a lot of games have that, but mainly they have skins, right? A lot of times they don't have S3 animations to do. So S3 animation is double the work, right? They gotta animate the sprite, they gotta do the particles, all that stuff, that what we call the post-production pass or visual effects or whatever. But then they have to, Smilegate has to do S3 animation, which has a separate artist. It may be the same artist, but I would imagine they have maybe a separate artist doing that work, the full coloring, the line drawing, and then the post-production, adding the sparks, adding the glows, adding all that stuff into the S3 animation itself. That's a whole other beast. Most games don't have both, right? So like I would be lenient on Closer Charles if all Epic 7's S3 animation were that bad, because they're still doing more work than most gacha games out there. But it's just my critique on Closer Charles is based on what they've already presented to us. So you can definitely tell the degradation in quality specifically for that animation. The sprite animation, on the other hand, is actually masterfully done. All of them change, all of them are different. You may have never noticed this before, but it was most apparent to me for the Summertime Iseria sprite animation. Before we get to the S3 animation, they're doing something in order to lead your eyes differently. Now look at this. All right, we're already starting off with the swords are pretty much the standard. Like this is their idol, but even their sword designs are kind of different. Like the glow amount, I didn't change anything in terms of the color. I mean, you could tell based on their sprite, but the glow color of Briar Witch's Iseria's sword versus Green Iseria's sword versus Summertime Iseria's sword. The sword shape is the same, but the glows and effects on them are vastly different. So we could continue on here. You could see there's some detail in the Summertime Iseria sword as well, actually. Let me just zoom in a bit so you guys can see this. So it's kind of plain on the Green Iseria on the Briar Witch, but then you can see like these elements, this kind of like this diamond element on the sword. That might be an addition, it might not be an improve in lore, but it might just be like addition in overall presentation quality that they wanted to present to us, which is again really amazing. Like this is what I meant by evolution. They definitely stepped up their game in each Iseria counterpart, although I still think that the Green Iseria really holds up at this point. Anyways, let's end up talking. Let's go to oops, zoomed in by accident. Okay, so frame by frame you can see that one, Summertime Iseria has a dynamic camera shift. She zooms in. That's different from the other ones. So there's vastly different dynamic or feel to the animation. Again, I did not recrop it in terms of the animation. Look at the souls. So look at the souls for the soul burn. They're the same size, so I did not rescale this. But this is mid animation, by the way, so the animation has just begun. The camera actually zoomed out for Summer Iseria. That's why she looks so small. It zoomed out and then it dynamically zooms in, right? So it's actually kind of cool. The swords are very different. Look at Briar Witch's, how she has this kind of swoop. Now Green Iseria will follow with a swoop, so that's very similar. But look at Summertime Iseria. Already very different. Briar Witch, Green Iseria, they're facing their opponent and they're kind of like static, right? They're static until they need to move. But Summertime, she's doing this kind of spin, which is what really caught my eye, because my eyes were really, you know, familiar with the Briar Witch and the Green Iseria kind of starting. But the Summertime has this spin, has this kind of like beautiful leg raise, has this cool, what do you call it? Like an S pose, I suppose. Look at the swords as well. Keep your eyes on the swords and how they change. Now, Green Iseria is doing this different kind of crouching thing. Again, very static because it's profile, and what we call profile is basically a side angle. Briar Witch Iseria is throwing it off a bit in terms of like having a different perspective. We're getting a 3/4 angle. So this is profile on Briar Witch. We're getting a 3/4 angle on her here. So we're getting a little bit more dynamic, even though the swords are looking about the same. Remember I said that at the beginning, the frames are not matching 100% because it's really hard to match them. They're vastly different. Look at Summertime though. She's doing this beautiful spin, and for you guys to understand the amount of work goes into Summertime, not just the hand-drawn part, is that their sprite animation, they're basically not sharing the exact same skeletal structure. They're actually turning her around, which the other Iserias do not have. So that what that means is that this is newly made models, newly made sprite pieces. Right, they're still moving in like what we would call marionette pieces, so like the arms and legs and stuff like that, but they're almost fine-tuning it to the point that they're almost hand animating the sprite animation itself. I don't know if you understand what I mean, and hopefully if you don't, but if you do, hopefully you can appreciate that a lot. Look at the swords as well. All right, Summertime. Let's focus on Summertime a bit more right now, because Briar Witch is pretty much at the end of her like special portion. Green Iseria is again the oldest and therefore the most lacking in terms of animation. But look at Summertime, right? The full spin. Look at the water coming out. So this is what I meant by that. The old animations had that black background to keep it ambiguous in terms of like what kind of background, right? They wanted to fit in every single portion of the game. So like they fade out the background, but like for Summertime and some of the new heroes, they're really not afraid to do that anymore, and I'm actually okay with it. I think that the evolution progressed so smoothly, or without without being so abrupt that most players just, you know, they viewed it and just like, oh, cool S3 animation, but they don't really think about the metaphor that they decided to remove. And I think Smilegate did that mentally in terms of like, they decided to do that as a whole. It's just like, you know what? Like keeping the metaphor that, or keeping the background ambiguous is not as important as selling the story. And I think I'm okay with that, right? But you guys do see the difference. Now the water of course will come in handy in terms of Summertime's swords go out wide. So you can see the perspective there, they're actually flying out and trying to go with like this kind of like 180 fashion, where the other Iserias are going upwards, as we know. That's how their animations continue. The water there is very beautiful. A lot of glows happening. A lot of glows are happening. Glows are one of the standard ways of transitioning. Makes the director or art director have different areas of transition points, and if you don't use them as transition points, they're still very pretty to look at. This is vastly why a lot of movies go with that lens flare. Michael Bay, J.J. Abrams, they do a lot of lens flare because they think it looks cool, but also if you watch their movies frame by frame, they will use those lens flares as masks in order to transition smoother, but you wouldn't really pick up on it because again, it's meant to do that. So Briar Witch here, also very cool. The swords are going up, but they're going up in a different way, right? So you can see the similarities that like the sword wing for Briar Witch and Green Iseria, but they still have different selling points, right? So evolution of animation. So as we continue, Summertime is going into her S3 animation quicker, the hand-drawn part, than the other ones. And I have to say, it might be intentional. I have to probably break down other characters and compare them, but it seems that they want to complete the S3 animations quicker on a lot of the new heroes, especially the ones with more fidelity. It could be memory issues, I don't know, that's just maybe a kind of like a guess. But as you can see here, Summertime, as soon as this blocks her away, they're already transitioning out of the UI. Notice how beautiful that is. Look at Summertime. Transition, boom. They don't even need to fade away the UI. It cuts so seamlessly. Why? Because our eyes are drawn to the motion that she's already started. So in terms of, if you think about her movement as momentum, it's really helping selling it. So her body first turning, and then the waves, what we call, let's say call the primary waves, turn with you, and then the hand-drawn animation will turn her as well. You can see that? There's a rotating element to this that really helps just mask it. So not only have Smilegate improved on just animation quality, the backgrounds and stuff like that, they've actually improved the way they do cuts. So remember, notice how if you look down now at the Briar Witch and Green Iseria, so on the left there, you notice how that I said that they had to fade the UI away. So see, they had to fade away the sprite and then the health bar, because they don't have a dynamic component to have the health bar like fade away. It snaps away. You look at Green Series, it snaps away. But they know that one frame, like if something disappears in the one frame, like it just snaps out. Most people don't find that too disturbing. Like they won't even notice it maybe. But they are fading out the UI elements one by one, whereas in the Summertime it is much faster. Like Briar Witch moves the camera up so you don't even need to see the health bar. So that's another way to mask away the UI to have it seamless. So Briar Witch, it just fades up and it goes to black. And you see some similar motif here. So let's ignore Summertime for now. She is beautiful. But we are going to do a full frame Summertime Iseria breakdown. So this motif up here as the swords go up, it looks pretty similar, right? You get this kind of like this fluid motion. It might be even exact shared animation, but you get this kind of fluid, these fluid lines, and it draws this kind of, what do you call it? Crest or whatever, and then it drops down. So in Briar Witch's case, it drops to rain. It's a pretty good transition. Wait, let's notice Briar Witch's. It just the rain starts, it fades in, but that has to fade out. In Green Iseria's case, it fades to white. So fading to white is fading to white or fading to black is like one of the easiest transitions, of course. It's easier, it's cheaper, it can work well, but of course it's not as smart. So they've improved their transitions a lot. And then Green Iseria pops in. Actually, I didn't notice that before. She actually just pops in. But if you're watching the full animation, you're not really, it's not too jarring, right? The rain easily flows down because remember that there's kind of like a bounce mechanic for Briar Witch Iseria. The camera goes up as her sprite went down. Follow this as the rain comes down, her sprite comes back up. So in terms of your eyes will be used to, like, okay, if the rain goes down, of course Briar Witch is down there because the camera left her from down there, so you know that her original placement. Whereas Green Iseria is actually more interesting, that it doesn't really make sense. I guess that's why they had to fade it to her, because the camera goes up into that diagram or into the logo icon thing. Yeah, it goes to that icon thing, and then we have to go down. They have to go back to the hero shot, right? So notice that they do have this for almost every single hero. The hero shot, they hold it for a couple frames. Couple frames will more or less be about a split second or even a full second in terms of 30 frames per second animation. These are animated at 30 frames per second. They're definitely not animated at 60 frames per second. That would just cause the artist a lot of issues. 30 frames per second is enough to translate because we're used to watching animations at 30 frames. Live action at 24, actually 24.97. But if you are watching HD, which I actually don't like, they have that fluid thing where if you ever watch movies, or back then like Blu-rays, have that thing where you could watch at 60 frames per second, you always feel like it's kind of weird. And that's why, right? Because your eyes are already attuned to the slower frame per second. Anyways, I mean, notice again, the Iseria animation, Green Iseria, we already talked about this before. It's older, but it's, it's fine. It's really good. The Briar Witch Iseria brings that the elder element, that color that I just talked about, and then boom. So while all that is happening, you notice that the Summertime Iseria is already damaging their heroes. Now, I did nothing in terms of trickery to actually, end the animation quicker, but there's just something I did notice, is that all three animations, seems that the newer ones are getting quicker and quicker animations. So as you can see now in cascading backwards, the Summertime Iseria hit their target, even though it hasn't done damage, but it does end the quickest. So here, that skill is over, whereas Briar Witch is still going, and Green Iseria has just begun hitting. So I'm playing this a bit faster so we can get through it. So almost at the same time, actually, Summertime and Briar Witch, almost the same time where it finishes in terms of like you get your full damage or your total damage. But Summertime Iseria does finish with a split second. It's not a race. I don't think they're trying to make it a race, but she does finish with a split second. As you can see, the punching bag on Briar Witch Iseria is still screaming there in the middle. But Summertime is over, so the damage portion is done. So because the dynamic objects or the targets have, I'm hit animations, you can tell that the animation on Summertime is actually finished at this point. As you can see, my soul burn is prepared, or I'm reset into the next skill. So in terms of Summertime, you can see that camera zoom in. I was talking about that before, dynamically zoomed out and then zoomed in, and then now it's zooming back in. But the Briar Witch just is more static. Oh, well, the zooming part is the preparing the attack. So you can see the Summertime is actually ready already. Summertime sword is already reset, Briar Witch Iseria sword reset, and then now Green Iseria sword reset. So I tried to start them at around the same exact time. It's not perfect, but you guys can tell that what I said was true. Now, anyways, let's break down the Summertime. Full on Summertime Iseria only. Beautiful, beautiful animation. Playing this a bit. Let's get into this. Again, we're gonna full screen this, and at a beautiful sprite animation with the rotation. The rotation really helps the eye, right? My critique on the Closer Charles things is that why do you have to jump backwards into a plane that's flying forwards and then dropping back down? So the momentum in terms of the movement, the actual attack movement, it just doesn't feel fluid. It doesn't feel like it's thought out. There's a lot of back and forth, up and down, and it's kind of like pointless. Whereas in these ones, you can say that, yeah, there's back and forth, there's up and downs, but it feels like it tells the story a lot better than, let's say, Charles. I keep using Charles ones because that one is the worst animation. Again, this is really cool too, because so it zooms in on her, of course, full frame. Everyone else is zoomed out, and they actually faded away, if I'm not mistaken. Not only does the camera move, yeah, they faded away. So the background fades away, and the dynamic objects, the enemies, they leave. So it doesn't have any issues with overlapping water, or it doesn't look like the enemies are being flooded at this point. It's just that this is her time, you know, the spotlight is on her. Again, that beautiful transition here with the wave actually covers her, but it doesn't just like do a cover, it does a cover but only a semi-cover too, right? So like they could at this point, yeah, let me take out my trusty snippet tool where I like to draw and analyze. They could have actually covered this entire portion here. They could have, and just made the frame quicker, but they decided not to. I've done a green Lilibet. Is her name Lilibet? Yeah, Lilibet. Because I kept on thinking Dilibet. Green Lilibet animation. There's one specific frame in Green Lilibet where she's sliding across the floor, and she has a very obvious crotch shot. The camera is aimed at her crotch, but you don't see anything because there's one rock blocking it. It was planned. That frame was actually planned. There was only one frame for that, and they had a rock blocking it the entire time, because as she was sliding, the rocks were coming up. But when you're watching an animation, you don't notice that. But when you go frame by frame, like some perverts, not me, but like some perverts, when you go frame by frame, you'll try to find little things like that, but they covered it, and very, very wisely. And I think that for this, they're trying to do that as well. They're trying to help sell that she's still there, and instead of just masking it away, because it might have been really abrupt if it was just like a big wave and she's covered. Your eyes have not adapted to that first initial wave that's covered her, and then so like this wouldn't make sense, right? So imagine if we just skipped that frame, it just went from this to this. It would still work, because remember, they have sold us with a momentum. The background waves here actually really help sell the overlapping. So the background waves are doing this, right? As we have her spiraling already this way, we already can tell, like you can see that movement, right? Follow my arrows, you can see that movement. So we can already foresee that if there's something coming up this way, it would make sense in terms of three-dimensional space, right? So they're already like they're basically subconsciously teaching you how to accept the animation storytelling already. But not only that, of course, they have the frames to kind of guide your eyes instead of just covering it. And like I said, if they had just chosen to cover it, we would have already been sold that would already come already, because our eyes and our mind had subconsciously already accepted the fact that this wave would come up like this, right? And in fact, I mean, these are helpful too. Very pointy elements help sell the motion or the movement, even if it's one frame. So for example, if they had chosen to do like a water droplet like this, but it was held in one frame, it wouldn't really look like it's a movement, right? The only part that it will look like it's a movement is actually if you play the animation. But in terms of all static imagery, all the static imagery are already looking dynamic, so it already helps sell the movement, even though we're playing frame by frame. Now, again, this portion, it was just really, really quick. And you know what? Like, when you do frame by frame, it does feel a bit abrupt, but it's actually just really good. Let me just play this part. See? See how fast that is? How fast that is, like, just like from this portion here. So in terms of like frame by frame, you can dissect a lot of the stuff, but every single detail that I mentioned actually helps sell it. So that, I mean, the more I play it, hold on, let me do a kind of a repeatable thing where I can edit this so that it only repeats at a certain frame that I want. So in terms of just like the spinning movement here, just gonna replay this over and over. So you can see this to be just like very, very easing on the eyes, right? not just she's beautiful, but it's very, very easy to adapt. I had to take a drink of water. All right, let's move on. So let's continue where we left off. So we got off here, and then now we see this portion. I mean, this low angle, it's beautiful too, right? So it's like reminiscent of some like commercials, like very well filmed, maybe perfume or some kind of like vacation spotlight type of angle. Of course, seeing the curves on a woman is good. I mean, she doesn't even need to have big jugs, and we still think she's very beautiful. Some kind of like close-ups on the amount of artwork that they went into. Look at the detail on like the ribbons here and the dagger that she has, right? Like they didn't need to show this, but it's part of their character design, so you know they wanted to show this, right? So even the tassels on this are flowing in the same way that our eyes are moving, right? Again, notice this. Remember, we're spinning this way, right? We're spinning this way, and so all the elements in the foreground are going this way. All the elements in the background, sorry, I'm drawing a lot. All the elements in the background are going this way. That's how you sell that 3D space that she's spinning, right? So just keep those things in mind as we continue. Okay, so we're spinning and spinning, and look at the sky. Look at we got the background, we got the sky in now, and we got some clouds. And so even just the color tuning, you can feel the warmth, you can feel the coolness of the sea and the sky and the atmosphere. We get this beautiful look on Iseria here, and I like how they did this kind of, as the camera is turning, you can see the background is changing. Remember what I said, the background, the clouds, follow the clouds. So I'm going frame by frame. They slow down the frames here on purpose. Again, hero shot for the face. Look at the cloud movement, right? So the frames are doing this from here to here to here. So the movement is this way. So what I just said about the background has to move this way. Foreground has to move the opposite way to sell the spiral. The expression on her face as well, that soft smile. Like if you don't break down and do a slow frame by frame, you maybe not notice all those little details, but it's what makes the S3 animations amazing to watch. You can watch them over and over and over again, and almost every single time you might pick up on something new, which I think is very, very cool. Like unless you do a frame by frame and you study it already, you will actually, every single time you see a very good S3, you'll be like, oh man, that S3 is really good, and you're gonna be actually just digesting new portions of the S3 almost every single time. Maybe not all the time, not every single viewing, but like maybe a separate day or some week, you're just like, hey, wait, I just noticed this on this S3 animation, I never noticed it before. It's that kind of stuff, the details, right? That really helps. This kind of side profile, very, very nice as well, showing a bit of her back. Let me recrop this a bit so we get to see the whole thing. There you go. Showing a bit of her back, again, very beautiful. Really shows off the entire design, right? So I mean, they did all that concept artwork, and it's a shame if they don't show the whole thing. So this, by showing this like this way, it also not only just does really cool storytelling, it also helps them have an excuse of showing all of her, right? So like realistically, at least from the S3 animation, we've seen at least 180 degrees of her, which is pretty good. The hat, the ribbon, what is it called, the ribbon? Whatever, the cloth flowing in the exact same direction that you would expect. This is a bit quicker, they're cutting this a bit quicker. So they're extending frames here so that when they're full-time animation, it feels like you see her more like longer. They'll cut here very quick, as you can see that there's one frame, boom, it spins. Why? Because of course, if you cut the frame, you have a faster animation. But the thing is, like, they don't want us to be like focusing on only the back portion, right? Like it's still nice to see like her hair is tied up like that. We already kind of know based on the in-game. And then we get the side profile again, and then she starts looking up. Now there's a difference of this looking up. I love how the hat flies too. The hat is what it will lead our eye. So as the hair Like all of this is so good. You know, I keep saying it's so good, it's so beautiful, whatever. I just because I'm at loss for words in terms of like how good this animation is. The hair, it flows up. You follow the hat. The hat becomes our kind of like our target here. It is important for the storytelling because again, if the camera just goes up instead of like the Briar Witch and Green Iseria, if the camera just goes up, they threw swords above, right? Whereas Summertime Iseria, her swords went out. So we don't know where they are right now, right? Because the camera's been focused on her, so we don't know where they are. So how do they get the swords back into frame while still kind of seamlessly tying in the story that they've told so far? Masterfully done. So notice this. Okay, so the hat falls. We're gonna follow it, of course. The hair, they didn't have to animate it this way, and I don't even know if the hair would animate this way, but because the wind apparently would pick that hat off. And so you have this kind of turbulence going upwards. You have, of course, the tassels naturally falling with the gravity and the motion here. So you get this really, really smooth arch, right? So as we continue to play this, we go to the sky. It cuts pretty quick, but our eyes are already attuned to it. So because there's a couple frames held on the face, and we already see the hat has fallen off. So in terms of enough information for your mind to already comprehend what's going on, they can speed this up almost as much as they want. We get a cooler visual of the sky that and also a perspective. Oh, that's actually interesting. I never noticed this one frame. Ah, I see. I think they did something weird here. This is caught in the animation, so this black frame is definitely there. I'm surprised to see it. I'm surprised to see it. Smilegate, if you're watching this, you may want to fix this. Oh, let me play this. Let me play this. Do we spot it? It's one frame. It's literally one frame, so I don't think you can really spot it, but it's there. And I see what they did. That's their way of masking it back into the sprite animation. Oh, it's definitely there, now that I noticed it. So Smilegate can definitely tidy it up, because that black frame actually served no purpose except to introduce the UI elements back. But they didn't need to do that, because the frame after, they already had the sprite animation. So let me just get there and explain. Maybe Smilegate overlooked it, because it's one frame. A lot of the times when I'm video editing, especially when I'm splicing video, like from one cut to another, sometimes I have one black frame from the cut because I didn't know to pull the other segment in. So yeah, so from here, this is all hand-drawn animation. And this is sprite animation. You can see the fidelity already changed. There's the bigger outline, there's it's more pixelated. Because they have to, right? So basically this hat is actually a series of flat images that they're moving along a course. They're moving along in a dynamic, actual, like, let's say, digital space. They're moving in a digital space. It's not animated anymore. I see what they're doing now. So this black frame is the unfortunate part, but don't worry, the animation is still very beautiful. Most of us probably didn't know it. I didn't even know it until I just broke this down. The background is also an image. It doesn't need to be dynamic anymore. So you can notice that the hat flying, they got a couple PNGs, so images. The hat flying here, this is one shared image, this hat. And then it has a couple other images here. This hat from this point, fly, 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 fly. It's all the same image. You can see that, right? It's just the image, it's a flat static image, not animated. And they're just moving it along a course. And it would cost less. So in terms of getting code to move a flat graphic across the screen versus you having to do multiple images and frames, it costs less to do this in terms of the load on the game, because at this point we already have dynamic things loaded into the game. We have the UI back. The UI has their own animations. The soul animations are always the kind of moving and like a flame-like, and then we have the dynamic objects to be hit in a sec. So the hat, again, we're flying with it, and the sun with the rays proved to be a very, very useful tool here. So as we're analyzing this, I just want to point out, how do you sell the distance of that sun? We already know inherently the sun is very far away, right? But they helped it by using these clouds as a reference point. So the sun is our focal point, and the rays are used not only, you know, as something that's like helping sell, but I'll talk about this later. They're using this as lines to help our 1 point perspective. So just keep that in mind. So as the hat is flying in, the sun becomes the focal point, and they're gonna just make the hat disappear. As the sun is moving, we get those water drops. It's a very, very nice touch actually, those water drops coming down. It helps keep things more interesting, even though again, there are only a couple frames, so your eyes may not even be attuned to it. You can see how that hat is still the same hat. You see how it's static here? Oh, actually they changed it. From this point on, they changed it to another image, but it's static, right? The tassels are not moving, but it's fine. It's fine. They need to keep the load down, and you can see the quality of the hat, right? And this is why back here the quality is so bad. It's because it's actually just an image that they zoomed in. They can't have a big image like that. It costs too much resource, and it would cause laggy animation. So they had to basically do a small image, and then they zoomed it in, or scaled it up rather, not zoomed in, scaled it up to help sell that. But because it happens so fast, your eyes will not really know about it. So as this falls away, check this out. So the hat disappears, easy, fading animation. And then what happens here? So the sun becomes a very, very good point where that, because your eyes are lit up, right, by the hat, the sun becomes a very, very good point of selling where those swords can come from. Although you can arguably say that, well, that doesn't make sense, it comes from the sun. No, it's just that they had to find a different way to actually achieve this. So the swords actually come down really quick. I actually didn't notice it. That's 1 frame right there. They decide not to stretch it because these swords seem to be sprites as well. So check this out. Let me see if there's a couple swords that happen at the same time. Yeah, so like, so this one I think it's a dynamic image. In terms of, not dynamic image, it's a flat image that they skewed. So they didn't draw it like this. So the perspective is a bit wonky, to be honest. So if you take a look at where the where the sword comes from, you can tell by this tip to the oh, my drawing's bad there. Hold on. I'll try to do this as best as possible. I'm using my mouse, so I'm trying to draw lines. You can see that the line doesn't match up to the sun. But maybe they're not trying to do that, but the perspective is definitely off. So in terms of the 1 point perspective that they established in the sun, this is actually not correct. The sword, unless it's flying in a skewed angle, it would actually never do this. So in terms of these lines, they should be pointing to the sun. But it happened so fast that, you know, when I was watching for the first couple times, the point of interest, or the perspective point, was actually coming from the sun. This is why I wanted to talk about it. The perspective point will eventually end up, the vanishing point, what we call it, it would end up like up here somewhere, probably further than that. So they kind of went off on it. When this is why you can tell that this is probably just like a flat image. It was drawn as a full-size sword, but they skewed it for this purpose. I think I know why though. Let me play a couple more frames. So you can see this sword is actually very, very wonky now. Like I said, the perspective wouldn't make sense unless the swords were actually flying in a skewed perspective in terms of like in the reality of it. I don't think that they meant to do it this way though. So you can see that the swords don't even look right. You can actually tell it's an image that they've kind of skewed, right? You can tell with the, what is this called? The hilt? The hilt, the perspective of the hilt is not right, and this is kind of like this. This one, the other one here is coming down, and I'll do the frame by frame. Oh, whoa, this one is odd. So there's definitely some things that they could tidy up here. I don't know if they did this dynamically, so therefore they couldn't get frame by frame. But you see how that sword here, that sword, stays in the same place? whereas the other one is moving, but you understand what I mean, right? Like it's not transforming with the camera angle, so it actually just looks kind of out of place. And then we get this transition where this sword kind of takes over. So at this point, like they got a couple of swords flying in, so our eyes are already kind of assuming that, you know, the swords are flying down. And so with this kind of white mask, it does help. It does help, and we assume that this is a sword. Now, even if we don't know if it is a sword, it doesn't matter. It's helping to sell this next frame, which here they did it really wise as well. Faded with a gradient. So you don't know now how far the swords have to go in terms of hitting the sea. They just wanted to cut to the chase, and it works. It works. This impact of the water, the camera slows down here, and then the swords plunge into the water. The camera slows down with the same kind of speed as if you would have fallen into the water. So it eases out, which is very, very nice touch actually. So it happens really fast, and as soon as you hit the water, the camera slows down as if you were looking as if you were the sword. And so it really feels like there's like a gravity to it. There's a real like physical property to this animation as well. That's something that's very, very nice. The hand-drawn portion, and you can see those swords. I think that what they did was they skewed the swords that you see on screen. In fact, they're still a bit skewed. Like this. So you can see like the hilt there, the perspective doesn't look right. It doesn't look actually three-dimensional, right? It looks flat. It looks like a flat image that you've kind of like turned, right? But I think this is what they were using for the swords dropping down, which is why it looks kind of strange. It might have been a different sprite too, or maybe they had time constraints and they couldn't polish it up, or they played the animation and just like, well, no one will notice it anyway until I did a breakdown of it. This part again, very, very cool as well. This is basically flowing in and out of sprite animation, out of hand-drawn animation, and they decided to do one more hand-drawn animation portion. So the dynamic objects are seen here, whatever your enemies would be, crow, whatever, you know, instead of the sandbags. You get the point that they're hit, or they're about to be hit. It fades to white and it cuts to this outside portion again as we see this huge water explosion. So very, very nice. They're still keeping up with this kind of spiral motif, which is nice. Even how the water explodes. They could have just did it as a straight up, like kind of like a nuclear kind of explosion, but they wanted to keep that spiral. Although at this point the spiral is going the opposite way. I don't mind it, to be honest, but remember what I was talking about, the foreground stuff? It's supposed to go the other way, but it's okay. That doesn't matter. I don't think you don't need to, it doesn't have to be, right? But they decided to make the spiral the other way. Boom, explosion. And then here, I see. So that, I think that portion is hand-drawn. Actually, no, it's not hand-drawn. It's not hand-drawn, my bad. The UI doesn't fade away. So these are, this is not the same S3 animation video. This is more dynamic objects, because as we zoomed out to see Iseria, you can see that cloth, the pixelation on the edges there. That tells me that this is a static image. It is a static image, I think. A couple static images. So is that the same quality? So instead of hand-drawn animation where they have to draw a larger Iseria and a smaller Iseria and then a smaller Iseria and a smaller Iseria, instead of repeating frames like that, they decided to go with PNG. It is transparent because the cloth, you can see that it is actually transparent. They decided to go with like a Photoshop file or something like that. And then moved a couple frames to continue to sell the animation that she's moving, but it's not a hand-drawn animation anymore because that would be too expensive. I definitely think that is the right way to go. Yeah, only a couple things are moving, and it's pretty much the same frames, about 3-4 frames repeated. The hair, the leaves on the hairdressing, the tassels, the cloth. I mean, this is still a lot of work. Don't get me wrong, this is still a ton of work. The belt moving as well. Yeah, so they went with a simpler type of animation here, but it's still very, very nice. As the explosion happens, someone mentioned to me the other day that they just noticed that it's actually a flower that bloomed. I think a lot of people didn't notice that early on, but it is something definitely you want to keep in mind. So continuing on the flower motif that we did see in Green Iseria. So in terms of her character, she's the same character, right? So very, very nice. And then we got like little particles coming down, and we got like a little mist sprays coming down from that flower as well. You can actually see like the stuff here. It's actually dropping down. Actually, I'm very, very impressed. There's a lot of stuff that I didn't notice actually until I'm doing this breakdown video, so I'm kind of commentating on it as I'm like reacting to it as I'm watching it. Fades out to white, and I think it's really fine. You know, it fades to white, it's really fine. Again, remember how Briarwitch had those stones flying up, Green Iseria had those petals flying up, she has bubbles flying up. So very, very nice touch, and then that is the end of the animation. Yeah, so that was a very, very long breakdown actually. I didn't expect to break it down that long. Anyways, so that's pretty much it for the Summertime Iseria animation, and I have to say, if her kit was better, she's honestly like very, very nice. I mean, SSB's animation was super good even back then. It's still comparably still really good right now. But the Summertime Iseria one I think is very, very nice. So Smilegate did an excellent job on this animation. With the little errors I saw, that black frame and then maybe the skewed swords could have been polished up a bit. I would say like this is like a solid... Man, do I ever want to get into ratings here? Because ratings are kind of like, you have to, it's relative because it's going to be relative to others. I would definitely rate it at like a, you know, out of 100%, let's use that. It's like a 98.5 for me. In terms of like how much effort it went into it, and compared to other animations as well, and the storytelling and the beauty of the art, etc, etc. So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. This has been a long one. If you guys watched to the end of this, thank you for watching. And if you guys have Discord, check out the Discord server, follow me on Twitter, subscribe to YouTube if you haven't. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.